Jump in here before the visiting gets carried away too much more. Everybody settle down. I hope y'all are all well today. Glad to have some of our folks back. I know they were glad to get home. I'm told that it's a life-changing experience. So I'm glad you all had the opportunity to experience that. David, special shout out and appreciation to you because you were the main organizer of that trip. So I know there's a lot of responsibility for that. I'm told you did a great job with you. That's good. Here we are in July. How about that? That means that we just ended the last quarter, so there's your attendance for the second quarter. And I've got two asterisks. I've got two of those things there beside Teresa's name because I was going to give her credit for her time spent in Africa, which kept her from being perfect attendance. And so, wouldn't you know, this morning, you can tell her I'm not giving her credit for that. Going to the chocolate factory in Hurst, Pennsylvania doesn't count. So anyway, I appreciate all of
another trip.
faithfulness and attendance. So it's good for us to be together this morning, and we'll get started here in our lesson after just a few remarks. We've got birthdays this week. We're going to recognize Tucker Berthalter in our class sometimes. His birthday's tomorrow, and Tom Walters is on Wednesday. Is that right? So happy birthday to our class attendees. And I was noticing a lot of the pictures in here that's from Tanzania, and especially the women all have their sleeves on, and it's just we have to be reminded that while we're experiencing summer here, that's the opposite time of the year there. So
Cindy pulled up Cindy pulled up the temperature yesterday because we were sweltering, and I didn't want to, prepare her for coming back, but it was 70 degrees where they were. It was 70 yesterday.
And then they come home to 99.
Yes.
Welcome to Alabama. But again, I'm glad you all had a good trip there. I won't expound on anything here in the announcements other than our plans for tonight. We're excited about that and hope you're able to be a part of that. I know it's going to be hot, and we just have to drink plenty of water and watch out for one another, I guess. But there'll be a lot of details given about that out in the auditorium, so I won't take our time for that. July's a busy month. We've got camp coming up here with Alan and Colin directing, and so again, more will be said about that later on. But my granddaughter Emma had a little surgical procedure at Children's last Monday, and she was able to come home on Wednesday. So children are very resilient, and she had a lot of pain that first day, and it broke my heart because she never cries. But by the evening, she slept all night Monday night and came home Wednesday, and so she's in good shape. Appreciate your concerns about that.
Is she able to gain weight with this?
She's already gaining weight with the tube that was in her, the feeding tube that was in her nose, and they moved that. I think one of the reasons was that they were not able to get enough food down that tube, so they had to put a long cord.
It's just a long cord.
Pardon me?
It's a more long term.
A long term thing.
Instead of Callie having to put that tube down.
Right. So we hope that at some point,
yeah, they'll keep working with her.
She'll transition into regular food. But in answer to your question, she is growing. She is growing a lot. Thank you for your concern. What else do we need to make mention of this morning? I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised we've got the number in class that we've got, because this is a vacation week, and so I know there'll be people traveling, and if that includes any of you, please be safe during that time.
There's a couple out of college with Williams, they were the major car accident, and they aren't sure if they've done all.
Y'all may remember John McWilliams, that was a member of our college group several years ago, when it's his younger brother, I believe, that was in a car accident, and yeah, I read where they said that they had done all for them that they could do, so I'm sure the McWilliams family appreciate your prayers. And, y'all come in. We're going. If we're nothing else, we're accommodating.
Y'all sit together.
Here we go.
You're not bothering me. Oh, I'm gonna sit up and close where I can talk loud.
One more announcement here before we get started. Alan put this on my podium to remind me to make mention of it to you. Bucket by Bucket, which these folks that went to Tanzania could tell you a lot about that work over there. And this summer, there's a campaign going on that for every $1 given to Bucket by Bucket this summer will be matched up to $10,000. So if you're interested in that work, and we all are, I would urge you to consider donating to that this summer. Happy birthday, America. I get to wear my tie one day a year. That's right. So, do we have anything else that we need to say this morning? Joel, how about wording our prayer?
Sure. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. Thank you for all the many blessings that you've given us. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to come together and learn and study another portion of your word. We ask that you help us to pay attention to what is being said, what is being taught, and we can apply it to our lives so we can go out and spread the gospel even more. We're thankful for the ones that have returned from Tanzania. We pray that much good is coming from the mission trip there. We already see that there are many baptisms going on, and we're thankful for that. We ask prayers for the McWilliams family, the ones that were in the car accident. We ask that if it be your will that they return to a normal walk of life. We're thankful for all the teachers here at Northport and their abilities to teach and help us learn. Go with us through this class and through worship services and through the rest of this day. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thank you. Class, for some time now, our quest has been to talk about the church. And the question that we asked when we first started this was, the New Testament church, can it be found today? And certainly it can, because we read in prophecy about in the days of these kings, the Lord will set up, God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So we know that it still can be found. We're winding the study down here, but it may be the most important part of the study as we kind of bring it to a close. Not something that's new to most of you, if not all of you, but it's something that is good to be reminded about every now and then, because it strengthens our faith in New Testament Christianity. What you see on the board here is kind of a crude drawing. Any of my drawings would be considered crude, but let me tell you the history of where this particular little idea came from. Teresa and I married in the summer, in June of 1977. Basil Overton. Does anybody in here remember Basil Overton? Basil was the editor of the World Evangelist up in Florence for years. He's gone now, but Basil was holding a meeting at the congregation where Teresa and I attended, and we'd been married about a month. And so he came over to the house. I had only been converted a short time myself, but he came over to the house and sat down with us, and drew what you see on the board here and talked through that. Well, it was news to me because I was a new convert, but it was news to Teresa to the point where she was baptized. But what you see here is kind of a timeline of the New Testament church that began at Pentecost. What you see on the red here is the true church. Okay? This is the New Testament church. The rest of what you see here is how the church apostatized, how it departed from the truth over time. And that's what we've been talking about here, and I don't mean to spend a lot of time with this, but it's important that we go back and remember how we looked at letters that were written around the years between 100 and 200 that referred to the bishop, and we see that departure occurring here as and it began in the area of leadership. And so then you have here in the year 200, you have those letters. You have the year 325, which is the Nicene Council. We'll talk about that even today, mention it a little bit. We've got the year 380, which is when the Emperor Theodosius made an official proclamation that made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Well, on the surface, somebody might say, well, that's good, but it's not good, because it never was God's intent that government and religion be mixed. But that's what was happening here. Of course, we got the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. And so this departure here that you see is a gradual departure. We talked about how it began, and 606 is the year that we said was what most people consider the first pope. And so at that point, then you have the full-fledged Roman Catholic Church that has departed from the New Testament church. Then that rocks on here until the year 1054. And in the year 1054, there was a split. That was the first major split in the Roman Catholic Church. And that was the split that occurred and produced the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, I've got some information here that I wanted to share with you a little bit, because we'll use the board for that. The Roman Catholic Church refers to three sources of authority. One of the sources is the Bible. One of the sources is the decree from the Pope. The Pope is said to be infallible. That means he can do no wrong. And so whatever the Pope says, decrees, then that's a source of authority as well. And also traditions. A lot of emphasis given on tradition. So you have three sources of authority. We'll come back to this slide a little in just a few minutes. But let's talk about this split here that happened between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. There was some political things, because remember the Roman Catholic Church housed in Rome, the Eastern Orthodox Church is housed in Constantinople, Istanbul today, and so there's some political issues there as well. But mainly it was religious issues, and I've got the three major points that caused the split here with the Eastern Orthodox Church. One was the Roman Catholic Church said the sacrament, communion, the sacrament was to be unleavened bread. Well, I have to agree with that. The Eastern Orthodox Church took the stand, though, that the sacrament could be leavened bread as well. It didn't have to be unleavened. Another thing was the Nicene Creed. Now remember, we said something about the traditions of man and the creeds of man being a source of authority. Well, the Nicene Creed that was in the year 325, we talked about that at length earlier in our series. But the Nicene Creed, according to the Roman Catholic Church, forbade marriage within the clergy. Okay? The Eastern Orthodox Church says, no, that's not the case. The priests can indeed be married. But here was the kicker. I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back. The Roman Catholic Church said the Pope at Rome had authority over everybody. He was over everyone. Well, the Eastern Orthodox folks over there in Constantinople said, no, not so. The Patriarch of Constantinople is on equal footing with the Pope at Rome. Well, that didn't sit well with the people in Rome and the Pope at Rome, and so they excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople. They kicked him out of the church. Well, at that point, then that's the birth. That's the beginning. That's the founding, really, of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, I thought it was very interesting that, so we've got these two separate entities. We've got the Roman Catholic Church coming here. We've got the Eastern Orthodox Church coming here. All that happened in the year 1054. But listen to this. So this led to the Patriarch of Constantinople being excommunicated from the Catholic Church. I found it interesting that in 1965, the Catholic Pope and the Orthodox Patriarch lifted that excommunication. And the two denominations restored relations, albeit still keeping their separate identities. Remember, I said that whatever the Pope decreed, that was universal law. And so in 1965, 900 years after that excommunication, well, they got together and said, let's resolve our differences here and let's lift that excommunication. Very, very interesting to me. Now, we talked about that pretty much in the past. I'll leave that up there in case you're still taking notes. Now, we come along here to 1570, and we're looking at what's happening here in the Roman Catholic Church. And in the year 1517, we have the Protestant Reformation. And that was began by Martin Luther, John Calvin, and many others. Well, all of these here, products of that Reformation, Protestant churches, if you will, all of these Protestant churches here are coming off of the Catholic Church with an idea of reforming the Catholic Church. We don't agree with what you're doing here. Remember Martin Luther and all the things he disagreed with. John Calvin had his, John Wesley. There were so many of those reformers there at that particular time. And I did this out here just to indicate that there would be churches that would split, and then there'd be some that would split off from them and say, we disagree with this. And then others would split from that. And so those splits, it wasn't just nice and neat as you see up here. It was splitting off. And I'll give you one example for that. The Baptist Church. How many different legs of the Baptist Church do we have today? Well, you've got the Southern Baptist, you've got the Primitive Baptist, you got the Free Will Baptist, you've got the First Baptist, you've got
That was in a Second Baptist. You were saying it over there close to the airport.
a Second Baptist. Well, if you just Google and said how many different Baptist churches are there, which is what I did, you'll start getting all of these different names, and every one of them is a little different, see? And so with each one of those, they have their own creed that sets them apart from the others. What we're describing here is the Protestant Reformation, the Protestant movement. They were all protesting something that had been before them. Martin Luther protested the Roman Catholic Church. Well, these over here might have been protesting whatever they split from there, if you will. So, remember I told you the authority for the Roman Catholic Church was this. Well, the authority for the churches, the Protestant churches, you see that on the board. They have this, they use as their authority the Bible, but then they also use man-made creeds, and they use traditions of men. Now, if we're interested in getting back to the true New Testament church, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful. I've been in meetings before where honest, well-intentioned brethren would say, well, let's write down the things that we stand for, the things that we believe. Be careful, because that can easily evolve into a what? A creed. Okay? Well, okay. None of us here would have a problem here with a man-made creed. What about traditions of man? You bet. If you don't think traditions of men still carry weight within the church, make a change in the worship service. Now, we kind of do it with tongue in cheek here, but it's very, very serious as well. Changing when you take the Lord's Supper, or changing where you meet on Sunday night, or changing, you name it, fill in the blank. That's traditions. So see, if we're interested in finding that New Testament church, what is our source of authority? And only the Bible. Nothing else matters. Now, all traditions are not bad, don't get me wrong. But traditions are spoken of in the New Testament. Traditions of God spoken of in a positive light. What we have to do, though, is any traditions that we have to weigh them with how they come up here. If we find they're short, then we don't want to follow them. So traditions of men as well. So we have this Protestant movement here that started, and I've put in my notes here. It was interesting, though, that it did not produce a Protestant church single. It was not a singular movement. You have a multiplicity of Protestant churches that have come out of that. So that's still happening today. Now, those of you that were with us last week before last or something, I gave you this sheet here that was called Appendix E because it came out of a book that I put together that shows you the listing of some familiar denominations: Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran, Mennonites, Church of England, Presbyterian, Baptist, Quakers, etc. All this list of denominations and where they started. Question for you. Why did I not put the Church of Christ on that list?
Not a denomination.
Why is the Church of Christ not on that list of these denominations?
We're not a denomination.
Well, I'll say this. We all in here have religious friends that don't share our faith. And I love them. But those religious friends would say Church of Christ belongs on that list too. Martin W. Stone, the Campbells. How many of you in here have ever been called a Campbellite? Raise your hand. I'm amazed. I have. I'm amazed that not more, because that's kind of a slang way of referring to people in the Church of Christ, because they say we're followers of Alexander Campbell. You just follow a group here that was set up by Alexander Campbell and his father, and refer to us as Campbellites. Well, let me tell you. Let's talk a little bit about why that's not the case. And this kind of discussion here ought to really strengthen your faith. Be reminded of the church with which we're a part of here. I want to be a part of this church right here. I want to be a part of the church that I can read about in the New Testament. And I can't tell you what's happened in that church from here to here. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts as far as what happened. That's not important to me. What's important to me is that Acts 2:47 says, and God added to them daily such as those that were being saved. Added to them in the church. That was Pentecost. That's the church that I want to be a part of, and that's the mentality of the restoration rather than the Reformation. In a nutshell, the Reformation here referred to the Protestant Reformation, referred to a group of men and churches and groups that were interested in Reformation, reforming the apostate Roman church. This church, Martin Luther was one of the early ones. But it's very clear in our discussion about Martin Luther when he said, indulgences, you can't buy your salvation. And a lot of things that he said we agreed with. But what I wouldn't agree with him is that his attitude was to reform this apostate church. Then you have this idea of restoration. Now, the restoration movement is a historical movement. If you Google it and you read about it, you'll find those names: Abner Jones and Barton W. Stone and Alexander Campbell and Thomas Campbell. You'll find all these people here listed as being part of the restoration movement. Your salvation doesn't depend on being understanding who Alexander Campbell was. You may have never heard of him, and you can still be a Christian. But the restoration plea is very important for us. The restoration movement's just a period of history. But the restoration plea is what I want us to really think about here, and that's the plea to, let's go back to just this. So there's a book down here in our library, if you're interested in further reading and further study. It's called The Search for the Ancient Order. And in that book, you'll find a whole lot more details than what we've shared in here. But those who were involved in the restoration movement, men like Barton W. Stone and Thomas and Alexander Campbell, called for unity among believers by simply following the Bible and rejecting all man-made creeds. The following statement by Thomas Campbell came to be known as the motto for this movement. Anybody venture to speculate? You'll recognize it when I tell you what it was.
Speak where the Bible speaks.
There it is. Joel got it. Speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent. Where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where the Bible is silent, we are silent. That became kind of the motto of the restoration, the restorers, those men interested in the restoration plea. So as a result of this, these restorers left the churches of men in order to try to simply follow Christ and His Word. There's a trip that I would love for us to take sometime. It's called the name of it's escapes my mind right now. I'll think of it in a minute. But it's a trip around the southeast up into Kentucky and some other places to see some of these old church buildings and where a lot of this started. Okay, the graves of Alexander and Thomas Campbell and Barton W. Stone, and I don't want you to misunderstand that I'm trying to put these men on a pedestal. They were not the founders of the church of which I see, but they were important in this idea of not a reformation, but a restoration. And these men were very important. Well, here's the deal. In Cane Ridge, Kentucky, and that incidentally is located in the county of Bourbon, Kentucky. Don't you find that amusing? I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that's where bourbon whiskey got its name. But Cane Ridge, located in the county of Bourbon County, Kentucky, there was a group there called the Springfield Presbyterian. Now remember I told you, Presbyterian, remember where those names came from, but there's religious followers of the Presbyterian Church and so forth. Well, there was a group in Cane Ridge, Kentucky called the Springfield Presbytery. And in 1804, Barton W. Stone was one of the signers of the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery. It's important. Now look here, this is what I want you to see. Here's just some excerpts out of this. Barton W. Stone and a group of others that were part of the Springfield Presbytery. I can send this to you by email if y'all just give me your email addresses. I'll send you the whole thing. But Barton W. Stone and others in the Springfield Presbytery started looking around and said, "Wait a minute, we're just a member of a group that is split off of another group here, and we don't want to be a part of a man-made group. We want to be part of the church that we read about in the New Testament." Would we all say amen to that? Yeah. But they went so far as to draft this last will and testament. They're killing that denomination for which they're part of. And just read it. "We will that this body die, be dissolved, and sink into union with the body of Christ at large. For there is but one body and one spirit, even as we are called in one hope of our calling. We will that the people henceforth take the Bible as the only sure guide to heaven. And as many as are offended with other books which stand in competition with it, may cast them into the fire if they choose. For it's better to enter into life having one book than having many to be cast into hell." And then he says, "Finally, we will that all our sister bodies read their Bibles carefully, that they may see their fate there determined and prepare for death before it's too late." That's fascinating to me. That happened in 1804 in Kentucky. And you can see why people outside the faith would say, he started Church of Christ. That's where Church of Christ started. No, because the attitude there is not to do that, but to do what? Restore it. Kill all that. Let's go back to the Bible. I want to be what they were. If I do what they did, I'll be what they were. I want to be a part of that group there. Some say denomination. Not my tongue. We are not a denomination. What does the word denominate mean? Divide. Denomination, division. Well, that's what you see here. Hundreds and hundreds of these right here. Well, we refer to denominations. I'm a math teacher a long time ago, and so when I think of denominations, it comes the word denominator. Of a fraction. It means to divide it, but denominate, okay, divide.
Glenn,
Yes.
just one point, with Stone and Campbell and all those guys, there's literature that goes back, besides the Bible, that talks about the Church of Christ prior to their birth. And there's even tombstones, I want to say they were up around Kentucky somewhere, of, that would state member of the Church of Christ or part of the Church of Christ, something like that. And these were tombstones that where people were buried prior to Stone and Campbell and those guys ever being born. And I think that, now, where did they sit in as far as reform? Were those, they just carried the towel or?
And I'm going to have to, I told y'all last week we'd finish. We've got to have one more, okay? But let me skip over something here to address what he's talking about here. Because I had in my notes, were these 1800 restorers the first to do so? Were they the first? And that's very unlikely. So I've got something here. I've got to skip over a couple of slides to get to it. What I've shown you, what I've got here on the board is just my research through the years, and I'm sure there's lots and lots and lots of others. But in the year 360, now look where we are over here, 360. This is still when the Roman Empire is intact. In the year 360 to 435, there's a man that was named John Cassian. Well, John Cassian was a monk and a spiritual writer. He and his followers taught that salvation through Christ was available to all who asked through free will choice. They referred back to the scriptures for their guidance. Were they seeking the true New Testament church? It sounds like it. Did they find it? Well, I don't know, but it sounds like that mindset was there even during the Roman Empire. All right, the year 422, the British group that I've got listed, Catholic Bishop Germanus complained of the British church that practiced believers' baptism and rejected the Roman church's authority. The year 422. In the year 500, there's a sect called the Paulicians that said that they were just Christians. They called each other brother and sister, and they rejected the infant baptism of the Catholic Church.
What does the C stand for?
Pardon me?
What does the C stand for about 500?
About.
Oh, okay.
The Waldenses, we talked about these a little bit when we talked about the Dark Ages, but in AD 1100, the Waldenses were led by Peter Waldo, and they taught that confession of sins did not have to be done to a priest. They also taught baptism by immersion only, and that it was not to be administered to infants. Then in the year 1157 and also 1164, 7 years later, first there were 30 and then later 80 men who came to Oxford and established a congregation seeking what we're talking about here in the years 1100, the 12th century. And then you have the Crosswaits in England, and you have the movement there in Glasgow, Scotland in 1700. All of that leading up to Abner Jones, Barton W. Stone, and the Campbells, Thomas and Alexander Campbell. So someone who says that the Church of Christ here, and by the way, let's talk about that reference. We're seeking the New Testament church. I deliberately refer to it as the New Testament church. Could you find that inside a building that has a sign on the outside of it that says the Church of God?
It's written in the Bible.
Or that says the Church of the Firstborn? Or it says just simply the church? Remember, we talked about the fact that we really don't have a name for the church given to us in the Bible, and that's the reason, say I'm picky if you want to, but that's the reason I don't capitalize the C in Church of Christ. Capitalizing the C makes it a name. Well, it's not a name. It's a description. It's the church that belongs to Christ. Church of God, the church that belongs to God. So what we have to see is, let's not get hung up on names. And I've told you before about, I think we talked about this one time about why were you baptized? Were you baptized in order to get into the church? That is an erroneous belief or thought. Some people might not even admit it, but in their mind they think that. And here's the reason I say that. It's because I've dealt with many people before. And others would say, unless they're baptized in the Church of Christ, I can't accept their baptism. Well, friends, I've got news for you. If you were baptized into the Church of Christ, I can't accept your baptism either. Because you're not baptized into the church. You're baptized into Christ for the remission of sins, and God adds you to the church. And I've studied with people, many people through the years that were not baptized into the Church of Christ, but we talked about their baptism, and they said, I was baptized for the remission of my sins. That's it. That's okay. I want them to be sure of that, because you can be baptized and it not be a scriptural baptism. Wasn't that what we see in Acts chapter 19? Where they had to go back and be rebaptized. So you gotta be sure that that baptism was a scriptural baptism. And if it was, God added you to the church. And then it's incumbent upon us to see, how do we worship? How do we be sure that we're part of that as a church? Give me one more week, we'll be through it, and we'll move on to the next stage, okay?
Thank you. How are you, Amy? Good.
You doing good?
How are you doing, Mr. Brand?
Well, I want to hear all about it. Somebody needs to give us a presentation.
Wow, I would love to tell you.
I felt so bad.
What do you call it? Gave the sermon, did the lesson, and then
That's a big honor for him.
it's oh, he was top of us. He was.